Hello, my name is Taylor Bowen, and today I'm going to be helping you identify what year your Nancy Drew book was published. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, what are your qualifications? Did you get a degree in library sciences? Are you an English major? Well, my qualifications is I'm a lifelong fan of Nancy Drew. I have loved Nancy Drew since I was probably in about third grade when I discovered Nancy Drew computer games. And that is when my grandma gave me her book that she got as a little girl called Nancy Drew's Secret of the Old Clock. And it quickly became my favorite book and my favorite computer game. And I turned this lifelong love into a little bit of a career because in 2016, I actually moved out to Seattle, Washington, where I worked for the company that makes Nancy Drew computer games. I worked there for about 2 years, and then now I've stayed on and I work remotely for them as a consultant on all things Nancy Drew, and I help with lots of fun stuff. But honestly, one of the things that I have done the most for them is I've gotten really good at identifying what year different Nancy Drew books were published. Besides that, probably the next biggest thing that I've done for them is just embarrassed myself online all the time for them. Yep, that is, if you're wondering if that is right, there is a Nancy Drew rap song, and I did have to make a music video of it one year. But there are hundreds of Nancy Drew books. There are over 533 Nancy Drew books to be exact. This is a little picture of my collection. And honestly, I'd like to think it's the biggest in the world, but I know there's a ton of other ones out there that are a lot bigger, including Jenna Fisher, who is probably the foremost authority in the Nancy Drew universe of Nancy Drew books, and who, through her research, I really understood and was able to identify a lot more books. So I have to give a big shout out to Jenna Fisher. But some of the most notable books in the series are the two in the top row on the left. Those are the classic Nancy Drew Yellowback books. Those are probably the books you think of when you think of Nancy Drew. Next over is Nancy Drew Case Files. And Case Files is when Nancy is in college. So not only is it solving mystery, there's a lot more romance in it. She has her lifelong boyfriend Ned, but there's even one of my favorite books is on the back. You would call a number, and you called one number if you wanted her to stay with Ned, and one number if you wanted her to break up with Ned to go date Frank Hardy, which I think is funny. Down underneath that one is the Nancy Drew Girl Detective series. Those ones were a little bit more modern. They were coming out with new ones when I was probably maybe 10, 15. And then the two other ones those are Nancy Drew Diaries. Nancy Drew Diaries, I believe Nancy's about in 3rd to 5th grade. Nancy Drew Notebook, she's even younger, 1st to 3rd, and she solves mysteries with Bess and George, her best friends. But these books were originally written by Milred Writ Bensen, who used the pseudonym Carolyn King to publish the first book in April of 1930. And back then, Nancy Drew books cost just a few dollars. I know this book from my grandmother. She got it as a gift from her classmates when she was getting her appendix taken out. There's about 20 kids in her class, and each of them brought in a nickel to buy this book. Versus today, some of these original books are worth between $5,000 and $10,000. So let's take a look at some of the key characteristics that can help me identify if this book is going to be one of those lucky expensive ones. So it may sound silly, but the first thing you need to do is just look at the book and see if it looks old. So there's going to be a zoomed in picture of the front, spine, and back of the book. It's the book I have. And some things to compare it to is this Nancy Drew other version of The Secret of the Old Clock. It's very shiny. I think it even says right on it that it was printed in 2019, so that's out of the picture. This one, it looks a little old, but clearly not as old as this one. And then a big kind of tricky thing is because this book has a dust jacket, it looks a little newer than this one. However, when we take the dust jacket off, it's the exact same. And so some of the first printings did not have dust jackets, But because the spine and the actual book still looks the same, we don't know if this one had a dust jacket and it's just lost to the ages, or if there was no dust jacket ever. So the next thing to do is to open up your book and look to see what the copyright is. However, don't be fooled by a copyright red herring, because just because it says copywritten in 1930, it doesn't mean it was printed then. But it's still a great place to start because the newer editions are going to have earlier copyrights. The next thing to do is, if there's a dust jacket, look on the back of the dust jacket. If there's not, look at the beginning of the book, and it will have a list of other Nancy Drew books in the series. It'll say something like, "Did you like this one? Read more." If you look at what the very last book is, which for this one, it's The Hidden Window Mystery. If you do a quick Google search to see when The Hidden Window Mystery was published, that is going to be a really great indicator of this book was probably printed right around that time. It's not too often that it would print a title and then months and months later the title would come out. So if this is listing The Hidden Window Mystery as an option for you to read, it means it's either going to be published in the next month or so, or it's already published. So right now we're looking at about 1956, but let's delve a little bit further. Okay, now books 1 through 34 were reprinted in 1956 because originally all the books 1 through 34 had 25 chapters. There was a reprint in 56 that took those 25 chapters down to 20, and it also just made the mystery a little bit more succinct, and it cleaned up a lot of the language that is no longer acceptable today. So we can look and we see that this book has 25 chapters, which means it was printed before that 1956 reprint. And one other fun thing just to note is there is a printing error on the contents. That S isn't filled in. So it might make it worth something extra special. I'm not sure, so I would need to do a little bit more research on that. Now, finally, even though we have a really good idea of that 1956 is seeming strong to us, one last thing that we can do to check is to open up the book and look at the end covers. The only end covers that the original printings, the first editions ever used, were these plain end covers. Now, books that were printed between 1930 and 1961 did use all these different end covers. So if your book has an end cover that's not listed on here, then you know for sure it was printed after 1961. Our book that we have today is this end cover, so we know for a fact it's unfortunately not a first edition because it's not that plain cream colored. But because the books list a book that was printed in 1956, however, though, there is still 25 chapters, so it was printed early 1956 because it was printed before the reprints, which happened in late 1956. Now, this is an extremely narrow timeline, which is amazing because normally you get about a 5-year kind of period. So this is really fun to know that the book that we have is from 1956. It may not be worth the $5,000 to $10,000, but this book is priceless to me because of the ties that it has to my childhood and my grandmother's childhood. Isn't it so exciting? We solved the mystery. Okay, now you guys have your own mystery to solve. I picked up this book of The Secret in the Old Attic about a month ago at a garage sale, and I finally have some time to figure out when this book was printed. I have left you 4 clues. Those clues are the copyright, the inside covers, the chapter numbers, or the amount of chapters, and the books listed that you could read if you liked this book. Feel free to use Google if you need to figure out when The Mystery of the Crocodile Island was printed, and happy hunting!